We're back with our 15th socially distant studio visit for these weird pandemic times. I call them studio visits, though they're more of a checking in with different artists that we've shown at Hall Walls over the years. Kind of an ongoing pandemic diary to see how people are doing and what they're doing and how things are wherever they are. And today we're chatting with Emily Veyduc and Cooper Battersby, who showed in 2012 at Hall Walls in an exhibition called Hopelessly Middle-Aged. And we're all a little more hopelessly middle-aged by this point. So my first question, as has to be the case in all of these talks, because we're all concerned about each other's well-being, is how are you both?
Mixed. I think we're feeling like
you got crap in your teeth.
Great. Some days are really great, and some days have been really hard. It's been really all over the map. We've been. We were traveling in March. We were in Mexico, and we cut our trip short and got emergency tickets back to the U.S. and landed in Atlanta. Drove from Atlanta to Syracuse. We're in Syracuse for like 2 days. And then decided to continue the quest to escape and came here to Nova Scotia.
And how are things in Nova Scotia? I mean, that is, I find there's a big difference in being in Buffalo, in a small city, which is small like Syracuse, compared to friends that I talk to in Brooklyn, in a very densely populated place. So what's it like on the ground in Nova Scotia in terms of people's behavior and the effect the pandemic has had?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. It is quite different in my sense of, like, in my understanding. We were, as like everybody knows, it's a real moving target to kind of get a sense of like, oh, this is what it's like here, because there's both the here part and the so that's like, if we think of it as two axes, there's place and then there's time in a basic philosophical sense, but also. So we saw Atlanta when things had just gotten so serious that they had announced they were closing the Canada-US border, and the Canadian government had told people to come home if they were abroad. So Atlanta at that moment didn't, like, it's Atlanta, it's where the CDC is, but it didn't seem to be that like shut down. And then we drove north. And at that point we might've gotten the best like snapshot of the various places. And at that point it did seem like the farther north you got, the more seriously people were taking it, which also I think kind of dovetails with this, one of the biggest things that I've been feeling about what's happening, this weird overlaying on people who are part of the left of a very pro-government attitude, like a pro-regulation attitude, which is part of general shifts around the left reacting against neoliberalism, which is laissez-faire, and it's kind of at its heart. And so we go north, it gets more tight, and then we come to Canada, and to us it appeared to get much more, people are taking it a lot more seriously. But it also is because we landed in real serious isolation in the countryside where we know literally nobody, and within a few days, our neighbors called the cops on us because we were under quarantine there, which changed, like, during these days as we're crossing the border, the rules changed for how much you needed to socially isolate. And they were like, no, you have to be in quarantine. But we're also hearing, but you can still go for walks as long as you're socially distant, and you can still pick up your groceries at the grocery store as long. Anyway, those things changed. We weren't allowed to go for walks, and we weren't allowed to go to the grocery store to pick up our groceries. And so our neighbors called the cops on us for going for walks.
And then what happened? The cops show up and talk you out of going for a walk?
They just left a business card on the door. And we called them in the morning and they were like, oh, no problem. We're just checking in, just want to make sure everyone knows the rules. It was very, very casual. It wasn't threatening in a real way, but the threatening thing was being like, oh, the like few neighbors we have, we're out in the middle of nowhere, but our like 2 houses we can see are like watching us with binoculars all the time. So it felt terrible.
And like the neighbor also like yelled at my uncle who was leaving, and she like ran over to his car and was like, among other things, said, "We know how long they've been here. We know where they came from because we have New York State plates."
But I mean, there's something weird about all that, because you would almost like to think that people that are in the country and more remote and where houses aren't that close together would feel generally more secure in this kind of situation, as opposed to more paranoid.
You would hope. And I think that it's a mix, like some people are being really casual. Like when you go to the grocery store here, some people are taking it seriously and a lot of people really are not.
I mean, it's one of the weird like things about trying to get a sense of the conditions in a place, to be trying to do so without actually speaking to any people.
Yeah. Well, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I imagine by the time you got to Syracuse, the university had probably closed down by then.
Yeah.
So have you both been doing remote teaching in the interim?
We're on leave this semester.
Oh,
so
okay.
Like, managed to avoid that, sudden shift to online.
That's very fortunate, because I am very curious about everybody that is teaching, because I mean, all teachers have to deal with it, but and maybe with video work. And I was talking to someone that teaches performance last week, and she said that was okay doing it via video, but in every other sense, if you're working with MFA grads doing materially based work, must be kind of aggravating to have to cope with this like new reality.
Oh God. Yeah, the people we know who are doing it, it's like driving them bonkers. And we did what we've done. I guess we've
just done one. We did one like talk to a class at Concordia, and it was just like completely awkward and difficult. And yeah, I think we would all get used to it the more we do it. But
oh no, the other thing we did was like an end of semester. It's these two women are graduating from our undergraduate program, and last night was their thesis screening, and it was fucking heartbreaking, to tell the truth. Like, these are kids who have done amazing work and have like transformed as people, and like have become serious critical thinkers, and like it's a grid of squares. Almost everybody's got their camera turned off because that's better in many ways. And so like it just was awful. I felt really, like, and the teacher, Boyana Rosa, who is, she's great. And she really was like really trying to kind of vet these kids in some way. But the idea that we could have any sort of productive dialogue about the work, it was worse than I imagined,
I mean, it's a real conundrum, because at the same time as you're describing that, which does sound very sad and kind of unfortunate for those students. I mean, if we didn't have this technology at all, and I wasn't able to talk to you two right now, or you weren't able to talk to students at all, I mean, that would be an unfathomably dark moment, It would really be cut off.
I know.
So this technology that we love to hate so much is still the thing that is binding us together in a weird way.
Yeah.
No, we've talked to a lot of people on video chat in one way or another, and it's been great. Like people who we don't normally reach out to, we've been talking a lot. It's been really good to reconnect.
I mean, that's like one of the few kind of nice things is having more time. Like, I really, we've talked like we've talked to a lot of people that I really care about, but in my regular life, I don't have time to stay in touch with. And that's like, anyway, I'm not trying to look on the bright side in any kind of Pollyanna-ish way, because there are certainly many more dark sides. And certainly this is just like hastening the sort of demise of small culture and hastening the scary dawn of this like age of the automaton and the big box store, but
and constant surveillance
and constant. Yeah. Sorry, I forgot about that one.
Yeah, well, I kind of presumed we were halfway there already. So
yeah,
I know.
You know,
We were halfway, but
Yeah.
this just like really gave us that like.
well, when you talk about talking to people that you don't normally have time to, I mean, is that really, does it make you think, well, it's not that I didn't have time to talk to them before, but I didn't make the time to talk to them before, and this is sort of, this situation is now reminding us that, well, we actually do have the time if we make the time.
No, it's not, because I mean, yes, like is the basic answer. Like, yes, I wish that we led more enmeshed lives. I very deeply wish that. But I think that if we do live in a culture that affixes worth so firmly to professionalization, then I like, the only time that I had in my days before this was time that I need for watching TV and being dumb and not being connected to anyone, like that those hours in that suck bubble, like I think I actually need those. So I'm not willing to swap those out for connection with people. But my work hours, those I will trade. But maybe that just means I'm a totally terrible person.
So I alluded earlier to having a slightly grim question, and this is the grim question. About a week after the coronavirus rode into town on a pale horse, and we were all kind of deep in pandemic mode, which is already a kind of warping of our reality. There was an incident, a 12-hour incident in Nova Scotia that included a mass shooting of 9 people, several arsons I think 9 people died in fires, 13 were shot by this one individual who much of the time was dressed as an RCMP officer and driving an RCMP-like vehicle. How much more, in the middle of a bloody pandemic, how much more does that kind of thing, the biggest mass killing in Canadian history, how much more does that warp reality that's already warped?
It's an interesting question. We've obviously talked about it.
Yeah, we've talked about it lots. I feel like our relationship to it is so different from everyone else here. Like people, we feel like it feels, especially because I think we're being so isolated right now, it feels very distant. Like it feels like it might as well be happening in another part of the world, like we don't know anyone involved. We don't know anyone who knows anyone involved. But for the people here, like when you listen to the radio and see like signs that people have in their yards and the kind of like community outpouring of support, it is like there's been a lot of concern, and it's just a shocking, horrible thing that I don't think we can say is not connected to this pandemic. I think that this environment of stress and anxiety that everyone is undergoing is like pushing people who are already close to that edge over it more quickly.
I mean, I think, yes, I think that the big takeaway for me from that is, it's an episode of domestic violence which sparked a multi-day rampage. His first victim was his partner, and that, I feel like, this is, I guess, kind of goes back to my general feelings of like this is making the things that are terrible more terrible. And obviously we know about the kind of rates of domestic violence around the world being like so skyrocketing under these conditions. And it's not only against romantic partners, it's against kids too. If you're in a family unit where the dynamics are really toxic, this is going to be the most toxic time that you remember, you know? Mm-hmm. And one of the things that so then I think that another piece of how we relate to that is both of us have a kind of allergy to sacralizing, like making something into a kind of, it's like why I hate Christmas, you know? I hate that particular flavor of vanilla pomp that that is like uniformly over Christmas, and then kind of oddly over this kind of thing too, you know, the way that these stories are reported, and then the way that the public relates to that somehow for me makes it harder for me to invest rather than making me invest. It makes me feel more distant and dissociated. And one of the things that people aren't talking about that much is that, like the previous famous Canadian mass killing, this is an anti-woman murder. This is like in the Montreal massacre, which held our previous record, was a guy at Polytechnic in Montreal pulling only the female students out of his engineering classes and telling them that feminism was why he was killing them. And similarly, this is an episode of a toxic masculinity, to use a kind of whatever term that people might feel ambivalent about. It's like a flowering of that evil that men are pushed toward, because feelings is so unbearable that they have to be contorted into rage. Yeah, so I understand why you said this was a dark question. It is, and it's a complicated question that has to do with how stuff gets spun.
Yeah. Is Moser's Island where you are currently, is that even geographically close to where this manhunt was taking place?
A couple hours away.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it ended like an hour from here, and it started a little over 2 hours from here. Yeah.
Yeah, our friend Samara Grace Chadwick, who's a documentary maker, she was asked by CBC to pitch some ideas for documentary, and she's thinking about making something about it, which is she told me some of the history of this place, Porta Peak. And do you want to tell?
No, go ahead.
So Porta Peak was an Acadian outpost, basically, and in, I think, the 1600s, 1700s,
late 1700s.
A British soldier came, and he walked the community, which is tiny. Porta Peak is just like a bunch of houses, and he met all the families, and he kept this really detailed journal about like the food that he ate with the families. And he went door to door to door. And then one of the things that he learned about was that this group of Acadians, which means they were French, were working with the Mi'kmaq, the indigenous population here, against the British, more or less. And so then this guy walked back through the village and went to all the houses he'd gone to before, and he murdered the families and he burned the houses down.
Well, I asked a grim question and I got a grim answer.
Mm-hmm.
It,
Yeah, there's there are like incidents, what seems like a singular incident is often like echoed throughout history, you know? Yeah. And geographically too, it's happening all over, like, you know, it's it's kind of novel in Canada to be like, oh, things are getting worse, we have this terrible thing. But in the United States, there's, you know, every day, every other day, there's some group of people who've been shot.
yeah, and so
I mean, I think the only thing the pandemic has brought us is fewer school shootings.
Yeah.
Weirdly enough. So not unsurprisingly, I was sort of looking back to the video "Here Is Everything," which is still behind me, and that was part of your exhibition in 2012. Excuse me. Partly because I remembered these two characters as being our narrators speaking to us from the future. So I was like, well, I want to see what they were saying from the future, because now we're in that future, or closer to the future that they were ostensibly speaking to us from. And there were a lot of big themes in that video. The idea of grace can be found without God, the idea that death is not nearly as terrible as the trauma that precedes it. But there was also this suggestion or notion that one try to experience vastness, is how it was put in the film. And the accompanying images were often sort of tight detail, microcosmic images that had a macrocosmic kind of metaphorical impact. And so I wanted to ask if in this weird time, if you are still able to find moments where you can experience the right kind of vastness that would fulfill your soul or warm your heart.
Yes, that would be the one kind of good thing to come of all this, is that we've spent quite a bit of time around the property where we are here, just essentially like gardening the forest, like working out in nature, clearing brush, and like spending time looking at things closely. And like, you know, sometimes all day, on a day when it's like, you know, 42 degrees and windy and rainy. We're outside
42,
for 6 hours.
That's a nice day.
Yeah. We had like snow 2 days ago. And, but anyways, it has, yes, we have definitely been able to do that. And it has been great because it's something that we don't do enough in our regular life, sort of like talking to people. It was one of those like, oh yeah, we should do this. This is a great thing. It's really amazing to just kind of sit in the natural world.
Yeah, it's weird. Like I wish I wish that I could say something that was less of a cliche, you know, about like what's good about like what, but I can't. It is a cliche, and the two things that I like in the pandemic are nature and people, specifically love. So yeah, and interestingly also, like when I think about my work, it's a lot about being smart. Like that's I'm trying to be smart. I'm trying to and for artists, to be smart and to avoid cliche are almost the same. There's actually a really great a really interesting book about that called The Recovering by a writer called Leslie Jameson, where she talks about like that she is a recovering alcoholic, and in AA, it's all about cliches. Like that's the only thing. And to try to tell your story or operate in a way that isn't using cliches is to be arrogant. And that, you know, that's one of the hallmarks of an addict, is that you're arrogant and you think you're better or different than other people. And the AA can only function, she's saying, because it embraces cliche. And so I feel like for me as an artist, there's this weird tension when I'm able to just go and like literally stoner out in nature, just be like, whoa, so wow, this sounds, you know, but it's fucking awesome and it's totally trite.
Has it pulled you away from making art, or have you are you guys working on anything?
We're still working on stuff. Yeah. No, I feel like I feel like we've certainly had days where we're like, I can't think of anything. I'm too anxious. Like things are terrible.
Yeah.
But we do continue to make stuff, and like we're working on something right now. We're talking about the next thing we're going to make. We're right in the middle of, we're in a good place as far as making work.
Yeah. No, it pulls me away from email, you know? That's like, it pulls me away from administration, which maybe we could just, instead of using the word soullessness, we could say professionalization.
Well, I did appreciate your email to me, Emily, and it did feel like it made me very anxious to want to talk to you both, because it was very kind of you to reach out via email and see how I'm doing. And, you know, my last question to everyone, and there's no hokey answer to this. Like some people have given me what they think are hokey answers, and I don't think there is a corny answer to this, but whenever the new version of normal returns, what is one of the first things you want to do that you can't do now?
I think there's two things that are coming to my mind. One would be like for the family that we have here that we're relatively close to be able to like go into their houses and like say hello and sit down and have a meal. And the other would be to just go to a coffee shop and just be in a public space where everyone isn't acting super stressed out and anxious. Like it's public space is a real like mixed thing, you know, it is not positive to be out in the world right now.
It sucks. Yeah, and like I'm going to confess that the best thing, the thing that I like most want to do, it's the rule I'm breaking. I'm hugging my niece. And like Cooper's gonna be like, I can't believe you're telling everybody that, because it's totally against the rules. And like I know that like I'm super careful, she's super careful, we fucking like disinfect ourselves in a Lysol shower before we touch, but like the joy that I am getting from that little fucking like face and hands, and without that I would not be afloat right now. And so yeah, I'm just really super glad that I have that. And then after that I would go to a grocery store and everyone would be like, oh hey, how's it going? Oh hey, nice to see you. Oh, look at those oranges. You know? What about you?
I haven't thought about it yet. Maybe it's the same as everyone else. You know, like one artist I asked said she just wanted to go into a store and browse.
Yeah.
It's just something so banal. And, you know, I have my own habits of getting coffee in the morning, of dropping by thrift shops, looking for thrift shop paintings. All of that's absent. I'm an introvert, but I'm an introvert that sees people every day.
Yeah.
And so I want to be back in the office. I want to be, as you know, Hall Walls is like any other art center. We're program based, and that means we want people to come to the things that we present.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
know.
And so
Yeah.
we want to get back to that point. We've talked about that. We don't know if there's going to be a point where some people remain paranoid and self-isolated because this has affected them especially strong, or whether there are other people that are just going to be very hungry to get back to an opening and be around people.
Mhm.
And so we're going to see what happens. I mean, we're all in uncharted territory, and in all our different places. So listen, thank you so much for taking some time out of your Nova Scotia day to talk. It's been really delightful to see you both. I hope you stay well. I hope when you're back in Syracuse, maybe we'll be closer in geography and we can see each other in person again real soon.
I hope so too. It's great to see you, John.
Yeah, it is really nice to see you, John.
All right, thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.